Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to welcome all of you to the first section program for AALS 2021 annual meeting, the theme of which is the power of words. We are here for the first program for this section on law libraries and legal information. And what we want to do to kick things off here is to present to you information about and introduce the recipient of our section award. Every year, each section is asked to nominate somebody who has contributed significantly to efforts and achievements and activities for the section. And we are really excited, delighted, and honored to be able to recognize Pauline Aranis as the recipient of our section award. Pauline has been involved in significant amounts of things across many years within AALS, within AALL, at her school, at the University of Southern California, and in many other ways. I want to just highlight two things because mostly what I want to do is hear from and about Pauline and get to the second part of our program after that. I want to highlight Pauline's contributions within AALS. She was the committee chair and a member prior to that, before we became a full section. And then as things go, the way that it works is with the section, then you're elected to be chair. So you're chair-elect, chair, and then past chair. So in the recent few years, that's the award and the leadership role that she held. And along the way, chaired nominations, was program planner, coordinator, contributor, leader, speaker, organizer, mentor, and everything else like that. So wonderful, wonderful accomplishments in those areas. If you look for her profile on the USC website, you can find an extensive list of her CV in teaching and publishing accomplishments. One of the contributions that many of us may have seen, and you should look out for, is an article that appeared in Law Library Journal in 2015, the title of which includes a call to leading for law library directors and the challenges in times of opportunity and significant challenges. Of course, right now we have experienced many significant challenges over the last weeks, months, and perhaps even years, but we are also finding ways to recognize opportunities in these areas. So I would like to now formally present our thanks, gratitude, and recognition to Pauline as the award recipient for our section, and turn it over to Pauline to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roger. I'd like to thank the section board and section members for this award. I'm truly humbled, grateful, and so very honored to be this year's award recipient. I'd like to acknowledge and express my gratitude to all the deans and vice deans with whom I've worked for their support and encouragement for my participation in professional and association activities and services. I've always had a special regard for this meeting and this section's activities and programs. It was a special time I could meet with peers to not only talk about big picture ideas regarding legal education and law libraries, but also I could have meaningful one-on-one discussions with people who truly understand the day-to-day challenges managing academic law libraries. To my fellow section board members, I feel very privileged to have worked with a wonderful group of dedicated and inspirational leaders. To my law librarian colleagues, thank you for your friendship and for sharing your knowledge, innovations, challenges, and experiences. Working and collaborating with you has been so rewarding, fun, and exhilarating. And last but not least, I want to acknowledge and thank two individuals who were my mentors and dear friends. Bob Baring, who opened doors for me and enthusiastically shared his joy about being a law librarian, and the late Albert Brecht, my teacher, my boss, my mentor, and my friend, who gave me opportunities and taught me so much about leadership and law librarianship. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pauline. And I think I mentioned this in our email exchange with each other, but I also recognize that not only had you been a mentor to many people across the profession, and I'm excited that you mentioned two of your mentors, but you had also helped me with understanding kind of the challenges and opportunities of becoming a library director and a library leader before I, had that opportunity presented to me. So I really appreciate the contributions you made to me personally, and also I'm really glad we can find a way to recognize all that you've done to contribute to this section for this as well. So thank you so much. A plaque
Thank
is
you.
on its way
Thank you.
with the mail of late. Well, we'll see how long it takes to get there, but we really excited about that.
Thank you.
Yes. And going on sort of parallel to the global health pandemic, all of us have been experiencing, and I think have witnessed in our own communities, other challenges and opportunities of problems that we've recognized, and things where we've seen racial injustice and inequities that we think we should be able to do something about. I am really excited to share the fact that two of my wonderful, dear colleagues and friends at the University of Richmond have found a way to do exactly that, which is recognize problems and share opportunities for change. Along the way, we found ways to provide collaboration, inspiration for both library and technology, and find ways to connect to our community so that it's not just talking about change, but it's doing change. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce the two co-panelists that I've got here for our Racial Justice Criminal Defense Project. And I'll just mention them briefly and show their pictures here. My wonderful colleagues here are Tara Casey and Julie McConnell. So I'll turn it over to Tara, who's going to walk us through really interesting opportunities and content that she and Julie have led, and many of our students and attorney colleagues in the area have been a part of. So thank you so much, and I'll give it over to you, Tara. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Roger. And I think, Julie, you and I both have quarantine hair changes from when our faculty photos were taken.
So very true.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all to talk a little bit about the project that we had developed here at the University of Richmond. So the Racial Justice Criminal Defense Project is a project that got started last year in the late spring, early summer. And as you all may remember, it was on May 25th that George Floyd died after he was pinned by a white police officer. And his death sparked a nationwide reckoning and reaction to the systemic racism that has been occurring in our country. There were protests that occurred not just in Minneapolis and cities across the country, as well as across the world, Paris, London, cities in Italy as well. And it was all as an uprising against what people had seen as a pattern of systemic racism and also, frankly, police brutality that needed to be addressed. And here in Richmond, we are the former capital of the Confederacy, and that wave of protests came to Richmond as well. I thought it'd be helpful to share first what the timeline was for what happened here in Richmond. So May 29th is when we first had our a night of protests here in Richmond. And if you have not been to Richmond before, we have an avenue. It's one of the main thoroughfares. It's a signature thoroughfare in Richmond called Monument Avenue. And on Monument Avenue are statues of individuals from the Confederacy. There's Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jeb Stuart, Admiral Maury, Jefferson Davis, and it's a signature avenue in Richmond. Well, that avenue became a focal point for many of the protests that occurred because there were these vestiges, these visual vestiges of the lost cause present here in Richmond. So many of the protests were focused around Monument Avenue and these statues. And as the emotions amplified during these protests, there were acts of vandalism, and there were acts of some destruction. And so I listed some there of City Bus. We do have the headquarters of the Daughter of Confederacy here. And after those acts occurred, the police and the city of Richmond implemented a curfew. So we had an 8 p.m. curfew that was implemented here in the city. And on May 31st began the first round of arrests that were directly tied to violation of the curfew. And then, as you see, it had about 200 people arrested that first night, often being rounded up in groups by the police for curfew violations. We also saw around this time period the police deploying chemical agents at the protesters. And so we are talking about, we're seeing tear gas being used, some rubber bullets are being used as well in order to what they consider to be control the crowd. But oftentimes there were incidents where the chemical agents were being deployed before even the curfew began. And so the protests continued every night, and that's when we started to see groups pulling down the statues. I listed here, we had Jefferson Davis was pulled down. We also had a statue of Christopher Columbus that was pulled down. And that's when the city then began to respond. The city government began to respond to remove some of this other statues on their own volition, because I think that they were concerned about the dangers that would occur with the public pulling the statues down. Some of the police response to the protests then were also continuing to shine a light on the interaction of police and people who live in the city of Richmond. And you started to see some of the protests going to the police department, which is located, the headquarters located in downtown city of Richmond. And during these times is when we started to see some of these chemical agents and arrests being happening now, not just against protesters, but against members of the press as well. And just amplified tension and just an increased riot geared tactical armor wearing law enforcement presence in the city of Richmond. And so what that all led to ultimately, and is just hundreds of people being arrested in the city of Richmond as a result of these protests, the vast majority of them peaceful protesters who were rounded up by law enforcement. And I have here a picture, you might have recognized it. It's also featured on the National Geographic year of 2020 picture review, but this is the Robert E. Lee statue that is in the city of Richmond. That one has not been removed yet. There's a whole other separate ongoing legal battle regarding the removal of that statue. So that statue remains, but it has become in many ways a standing emblem of the uprisings and protests of last year. And in fact, we have local artists who have used it as a screen to amplify Black voices and Black Lives Matters issues. So after these protests, we had the police chief resigned. All of the Confederate monuments, almost all of them, have been removed. And the protests did gradually decrease. We have not seen that level of regular protesting occur. So, but after that all started to wind down was when the legal issues began for many of those caught. So the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office here in the city of Richmond took jail time off of the table for many of these protesters. But what that wound up doing then is cutting off any access to public defenders. So we had individuals, hundreds of individuals who were arrested, who were facing criminal charges, but because no jail time was attached, they couldn't access a public defender. So about 20 local private attorneys formed a collaborative called the RVA Legal Collaborative, whose sole mission was to provide representation to those who have been arrested as part of the protest against systemic racism. As that collaborative was forming, I was able to, because of my work through the Carrico Center, reach out to the members of that collaborative to see what could we provide in terms of support, of law student support, and also whatever connections that we have that might be able to be of support. And I am very lucky to have the colleagues that I have who I was able to reach out to bring as part of this collaboration. And so from the law school perspective, the law students volunteered to provide direct client assistance, research and writing on issues that overlapped multiple defendants, some just core foundational issues. So we had close to about 30 law students who are all mobilized and providing support on both individual cases and also wider case strategies. But there was also this other need that came about that required our connection to resources that available through our law library. And that was mainly due to our the need for assistance with reviewing video footage. And so all of our officers in the city of Richmond have body cameras. So they have what we call body worn camera footage, BWC footage. And because of the protests, there were thousands of hours of body worn camera footage that needed to be reviewed, as well as you all probably saw, social media played a huge role in many of these protests with Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram, all of these. And so we had non-law enforcement video footage that was nevertheless relevant to many of the arrests that have occurred. And this presented a tremendous challenge to these pro bono attorneys who were trying to provide, representation for these protesters, but just were going to be buried with the amount of video footage that needed to be recorded and needed to be reviewed. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Julie McConnell, who is the director of our Children's Defense Clinic, and she is a pro bono criminal defense titan in her own right. And she was one of the ones who originally identified these issues. And this is when we brought in our wonderful supportive colleague, Roger Skalbeck, to help us figure out how to solve them. Julie?
Thanks, Tara. So the first thing we did is we called Roger and also Josh Kubicki, our Technology and Innovation Director, our new Director of Technology and Innovation at the University of Richmond, to talk about how in the world we would be able to process, hundreds of hours of body-worn camera footage, not to mention the social media footage, and how students could play an active role in that. And they came up with the idea of perhaps asking an e-discovery platform to provide pro bono assistance to the project. And Josh had previously connected with iConnect and thought they might be a good candidate for this role. So thankfully they said yes. And they really have done some amazing work in helping us to process all of this video and give the students a way to play a role in supporting the pro bono project that had previously been established by these attorneys. So while some of these students had looked at footage before, they'd never had a situation where they were getting 30 different large files of video for one incident and no direction about where the needle was in the haystack. And so they were able to use iConnect to go through each video, tag the important pieces in the video, provide commentary, and then help us to create reports that we could then use in our legal efforts on behalf of these individuals. And as Tara mentioned, many of them did not have access to attorneys because they were charged with offenses that the Commonwealth's attorney said she would not seek jail time on. But others were charged with very serious offenses. My clients, I had several clients, and one was charged with a number of felonies because he was accused of having shot an officer with a paintball gun. And that would have been a situation, he was 17 years old, where that conviction, if he had been convicted of that crime, would have stayed on his record for the rest of his life. And so he was actually facing a very serious situation. And so one of the many challenges that defense attorneys are facing now, and prosecutors honestly, is how to process all of this video footage that happens in any criminal case, but especially in a situation like this. So iConnect has been a wonderful platform. They provided hours and hours of technical support to us to learn how to use the system to its best benefit and to teach students how to use it. So one of the things that Tara and I did is we created a training for law students where we talked to them about how to use iConnect and what things to look for in the video. And Tara, if you could show the list of things that we asked them to focus on. So what we did is I came up with some of the main issues that the students need to be looking for in the videos, and I talked to them about how to look for those things, how to identify them, and then how to make them accessible to the attorneys handling the cases so that they didn't have to look at 100 hours of video. They could go right to the important places in the video that would be relevant to their advocacy efforts on behalf of these individuals. So things like, were there exculpatory statements? Were there inculpatory statements that the people who were charged with these offenses had made? Was there privileged information that we needed to, be aware of in terms of how we would use the video? Could we make it public? Could we share it with other clients who are charged? All these types of questions are really important in this kind of evidence. Who was actually in a video? Which officer said what thing? What the defendant said and when? Those types of issues. What type of document it was. Was it crowdsourced video? Was it a body-worn camera video? Was it a recorded interrogation that took place then at a police station, or was it one that was just on a body-worn camera on the street? And then the date and time and how it connected to the case were the things that we asked them to look at. So with this information, the students could then go into the iConnect system, log on, and look at all of the videos on a particular case and see what was there that might be helpful. In some cases, they could also determine whether this information might be helpful in other cases, because as Tara said, on some nights they were arresting multiple people at the same time. And so if they arrested 200 people at one rally, there may be multiple ways in which the videos would be relevant to other clients. I also represented a protester in Portsmouth where they were trying to take down a monument there. And there were a number of the individuals that were up on the monument itself, pushing from behind, and others that were pulling from the other side. And so the videos from each of those individuals, became very relevant to the overall defense of the case. 20 people, over 20 people, actually, I think it was 21, were charged in that offense, including a state senator, all of the leadership of the local NAACP, a number of public defenders, a number of students, and a number of military people who were active in the military at the time, because this is the Tidewater area where Portsmouth is an area that is heavily military. So there were a lot of young people who had just joined the Army, didn't have any resources for counsel, and so I was able to get involved and represent one of those individuals as well. Can we go to the next slide, Tara? So what I want to show you here is an example of what we could do with the video that we were receiving to make it more digestible to either a judge, a prosecutor, a police officer that we might be trying to convince should not pursue the charges, that sort of thing. And so what I did is I worked with my students to create a short movie about the client that would incorporate some of the body-worn camera footage and also incorporate things that the client had provided to us. Like we would ask them to provide us pictures, things from their social media, things about their life, so that we could help tell the story of that individual in a broader way. That this is why they were there. This is what they were trying to accomplish. They're not, people who are trying to hurt police officers or hurt our community, but this is actually, the message they were trying to send. And so I had my students really work with the family, the client, and the body-worn camera footage to create a video that would help us change the narrative. And in this particular client's case, he was 17 years old. He was about to finish high school. I think he had actually graduated just a couple days before, because his offense occurred in the early weeks of June, and that was right after he had graduated from high school, but he was still 17. So he was charged as a juvenile, and he was charged with assaulting a police officer by shooting a paint gun in his direction, and some of the paint got on the officer's uniform. They actually charged him with a felony for that. He was also charged with obstruction of justice because he ran from the police officers when they started chasing him. But I want to put that in context for you, because as Tara mentioned earlier in her slides about the chronological order of how things happen in Richmond, on June 13th, a group of police officers in a police SUV drove into the crowd of protesters. And it was quite dramatic. It was on video. People were screaming, getting out of the way. It was really an unfortunate moment in the progression of this activity that was taking place there. And so in the days following that incident, my client was out at the monument, and it was in the early evening, and an officer in an SUV did the same thing, came after him in the vehicle, driving on the sidewalk, and so he ran away. And then he was also charged with unlawful assembly, because what the local police started doing is using an unlawful assembly statute, which is rarely used, to charge these individuals for gathering around the Lee Monument. So that was a misdemeanor charge of unlawful assembly. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to show the prosecutor and the police officers in this case that this kid was actually not running because he thought he'd done something wrong. He was running because he was scared. He was African American. He had obviously a lot of awareness about what had happened with George Floyd and all of the other incidents leading up to that moment. And he was actually really scared. And what we were able to see in these videos was many examples of his trying to express to the officers his fear in the situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this video, but I want to also tell you that when we made the video, don't think that there's something wrong with your sound. We used words and pictures on many of the parts of the video rather than actual sound. So don't worry when you don't hear anything. Pay attention to what's on the screen, the writing, and the videos to help tell the story.
So, Mr. Short, why did you come down to Richmond tonight?
Richmond?
Yeah, I mean, that's where you're at.
Oh, yeah.
Just to have a good time?
For change.
For change? What kind of change?
You think you shouldn't pay?
Where's that at?
Sorry, I go with you.
What are you doing over here? What are you doing in the city? You don't even live here.
Where you live at?
He lives in Henrico.
I bet he does. Don't they all?
On Park Avenue. Okay, you know where Park Avenue is? Well, you probably don't because you're not from the city or you don't belong around here. But I'll let you. That's cool, man. You keep on doing the shit you're doing, you end up on a t-shirt. R.I.P. Mr. Short.
Come with change.
I guarantee you were an angel. You wanted to go to school. You work hard, all of that.
They was gonna put your football picture up.
Yeah. Right? But you're just completing the narrative by being out and doing dumb shit like this. That's all you're doing. If you really want to make a change, you are not going the right direction. You're going backwards. So you're taking us back.
This officer and that officer jumped out on you and you took off for why? Why did you take off?
He jumped out and called me. I was scared.
You're scared? What are you scared for? You're probably in the safest part of this entire state right now because all the police officers are around here. Is there a specific reason why you ran?
I was scared.
You're scared. Can you express the reasons why you're scared? No, you just want to go through the motions and say you're scared? Okay.
So what we were able to do with this video is we were able to take this to the prosecutor and say to her, we want you to get to know Tavera Short a little better than what you've heard from these police officers. And I also want to give you another piece of context. The officer that was primarily questioning Taveras that night, from the moment he met him, it was clear on the video that he thought he was a criminal, a thug, someone who was just out there for trouble. And when Taveras tried to tell him that he had never been in trouble in his life, he'd never had any encounters of this nature, the officer didn't want to hear it. He didn't believe him. And when he questioned his parents about it, actually, let me just say, he also said to the young man, do you have parents? Are your parents, around? And he said, yes, I live with my parents. You live with both of your parents? the bias that he showed in all of his questioning, that he couldn't imagine that this young man came from an intact family, that he'd never been in trouble before. He was very confrontational with him about whether he'd ever had a job. And Taveras said, well, I'm a high school student. And then he said, well, actually, I just graduated and I played football and I coached younger kids and I was very busy with that, so I didn't have another job. The officer just kept acting like he was a no good, leech who wouldn't have ever thought of having a job or supporting himself. And he didn't want to accept that Taveras was only 17. And of course, it made sense that he didn't have a job. So that was very disheartening for the students to see. And when they heard the officer say, you're going to end up RIP Mr. Short on a t-shirt, that was a shocking moment for all of us in reviewing these videos. So we were able to take that to the prosecutor and say, this is how this officer interacted with our client and the officers that were with him. What we didn't know at the moment that we were doing these negotiations is that he was about to be indicted for assaulting other protesters several nights earlier. We found that out after the fact, but it was clear from the video, even the little snippets that you saw here, that there was just a real disconnect between these officers and why this young man was there. And when I talked to his family, they told me that he and his sister and his parents had gone together to the monuments on several occasions during the day to be a part of this moment, this reckoning that was taking place in Richmond. And they were proud to take their children there. And so when Taveras went there that night, he was continuing what his family had taught him, that when you believe that it's time for change, you stand up and you tell the community, that we deserve better than this. So to be able to gather this video in such a powerful way and then put it into a film that we could take to the prosecutor made all the difference in the case. This young man had a full scholarship to college. He was about to leave for school. This would have changed his life forever. It's very hard to hold on to a scholarship and go to college when you have a felony conviction for assaulting a police officer. So we were able to convince the prosecutor in this case that the appropriate thing to do was to temporarily take the matter under advisement to make sure he stayed out of trouble until he started school, have him engage in a restorative justice dialogue with the sergeant, who was actually a really decent officer that I'd known for years, that he had allegedly shot the paintball gun at, and to have them have a conversation about why he was there and the perspective of the police officers about why they were there, and to try to find some common ground. And that if he did that and he did some community service, he was required to do 40 hours of community service, which he did, within about a month. It was incredible how quickly he did it, that she would dismiss the charges. And so we had a really terrific outcome in this case. But without the ability to go through all that video and really turn it into something that we could use in our advocacy, I don't know that we would have gotten there, especially not as easily as we did. The good news is Taveras is at college. He's doing great. His family actually moved down close to the school to be closer to him. His charges have been completely dismissed. The restorative justice was very successful, as well as his community service. And so there was a good outcome in this case. But a lot of it was because of the incredible support of Tara and Roger and Josh and iConnect. And so that's why we wanted to tell this story about how important this collaboration was to our being able to do this. I took this case without any compensation, just as all of the other pro bono attorneys did. So not only are we taking these cases without any compensation, we're then spending hundreds of hours, reviewing video. And that's just very hard for attorneys who make $125 to do a case like this, no matter how much time they spend on it. So this was a way to really open students' eyes to how important it is to, engage in pro bono advocacy, spend the time to help folks who would not have the resources to hire attorneys otherwise. His family did not have the money to hire an attorney. They wouldn't have been able to qualify for counsel given that his father worked. So they would have had to find some way to scrape together the dollars to hire an attorney if we hadn't had this pro bono project where we could provide this representation at absolutely no cost to them. Terry, if you could turn to the next slide. Another case that I mentioned earlier was in Portsmouth. It was a very similar situation where more than 20 people were charged. Now, Senator Lucas, who was the majority leader, she was head of the Black Caucus as well in the General Assembly. She had resources, and of course, she had a great attorney representing her. But many of the people charged had no resources to hire counsel, so it was a real privilege to be a part of that. But when we received our discovery in the case, it was literally 45 different downloads of video and other documentation of the protests that had happened there. And much like in Richmond, the police chief ended up being fired. There was all kinds of fallout because of this. So it was highly political, highly complicated. They had to bring in another judge from another jurisdiction because all the judges recused themselves. The Commonwealth's attorney, who was a very progressive Commonwealth's attorney, they tried to recuse her. They tried to force her to stand down and allow someone else to come in and prosecute the case. So these cases, because they're so involved like this, they just take so much time to prepare. And the students, again, because of the collaboration and because of iConnect, were able to use this video, turn it into something that all of us could use in our advocacy. We basically had a joint defense for all of the defendants together, and the final outcome is that all of the charges were dismissed with prejudice and cannot be brought back. So it was a huge victory for the community as well as for pro bono representation. So we just wanted to share that story as well. So at this time, Roger, would you like us to open things up for questions?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. So I'll start out with a question, and then I think we can feed questions from the audience as well, which is, sort of a comment and a question. One comment is, it's really fascinating seeing that body-worn footage and also being here in Richmond. He says, you're not from around here, you're from Henrico. Well, if you've never been to the city of Richmond or seen the geography of what our area is like, the county of Henrico literally surrounds Richmond. So he could not be...
the University of Richmond itself straddles the city of Richmond, Henrico County line.
Yeah.
Exactly. So depending on which side of campus you get your food on, you may be actually eating in Henrico or Richmond.
Right.
But just, this like, you're not from around here is just like flabbergasting. So that's more a comment because, if you're not from around here, you wouldn't recognize the sort of idiocy of that statement. But what I wanted to sort of hear from you, especially thinking about this connection and the student experience, is what kinds of things do you think students have experienced or been able to do as part of this, and where do you think we should be going next, or how might other schools with similar circumstances of lots of sources of information trying to basically take an approach to systemic issues, what should we be thinking about?
Well, I would say first that the student mobilization was very much self-generated. I think that in this time, students want to be engaged. They want to be working on these issues. We have seen an exponential increase in student interest in helping with areas ranging from eviction to unemployment insurance to racial justice, because they're responding to our time. And so I, in many ways, review myself as a facilitator of good deeds and a listener to where our students' interests are. And I think being able to recognize what the students are wanting to get involved in as the launch pad then to frame that involvement is one of the first steps. And then the second step that I would encourage is always that law schools have to be in partnership with their surrounding communities. We can't necessarily go in and Mighty Mouse any of these situations. And that requires building those partnerships and those relationships over the years so that when you get to these crisis points and you're entering these conversations, you are a recognized resource and ally moving forward. So I would say the law student mobilization piece, that was key. And then I would say then the third part that I saw from my angle of this is being able to have the relationship with our law librarians. I mean, I'm completely biased, but I think we have probably one of the best law library crew in the country. And because I can come to you all, I can come to Roger and to other of the research law librarians in any aspect of the work that I'm doing. And there's creativity, there is innovative thought, and there is genuine partnership there. So for example, I just recently am having a conversation with Roger and another one of our colleagues in the law library regarding doing a big deep dive into criminal data on how certain criminal statutes that are on the books in Virginia are disproportionately affecting LGBTQ members of our community. And that's going to be a big, deep data dive that we need the resources and the expertise of our law library faculty. Well, those again are relationships that you build over time, recognizing what you all are bringing to the table. And I just felt so fortunate when this was happening, especially with how quick the turnaround had to be in this situation, to be able to have Roger and Josh and the law library at Richmond be so responsive and so creative and so innovative in this space. So that's my angle from it, Julie.
Yeah, exactly what Tara said. But I would also just add that what I've found with students is that what makes a big difference in how engaged they become in the process is when we can connect them with real clients. And so when the students started to get to know this young man or get to know the young woman we represented down in Portsmouth, and then want to tell their story in a powerful way, they're excited about the opportunity to learn how to use these tools. They're excited about creating something. They're excited about learning to advocate. But connecting them to the community, as Tara said, and to people that really do need their help, and helping them to understand that access to justice is so key, to what we do, and to give these two individuals top-notch, holistic, client-centered representation is really, sort of the gold standard in how to represent clients. And they may find that very challenging when they get out in the real world, but we're giving them some tools that they can figure out how to use, even with all the challenges of heavy caseloads and few, narrow resources and that sort of thing. What we want to do in our programs here is teach them absolutely best practices. Like, what would you do in the best, situation with all the resources? And if you don't have the resources, how do you get them? And we did this all essentially with very little funding. Roger was able to negotiate a way to store the data for very low cost. iConnect gave their services completely without cost. And so we were able to create this really robust system. The research and writing that the students did for the attorneys was hugely helpful in getting a lot of the charges dismissed, including the unlawful assembly and trespassing charges, the violation of curfew charges. Their research enabled dozens of individuals to have their charges dismissed on the law because of the research that they had done. And so, our ability to, provide them with the resources they need to do that work and to learn how just finding the right statute or case can make all the difference in a case. I think it's just fun to see that spark get lit in students, and to help them to see that they can truly make a difference in the world. And maybe all they do is they do some of these cases on the side as pro bono when they're in practice. But I think what we've done is we've shown them how much fun it can be to give people access to justice who wouldn't have it otherwise. And I hope that sticks and they carry that forward into their practices. And I think many of them will. So that's what I love about it.
And Julie, my sense too is that, the students are wanting to see the integration of technology in these access to justice spaces. And so they're wanting to know, are there IT solutions to what are often these systemic gums to justice? And so for us to be able to have the iConnect program be part of it, it is feeding that desire from the students of, okay, how can we use all of these advances in technology to advance access to justice? Here is an example.
Exactly. And when they made the video, I didn't give them any, budget to do that. They had to do it with no resources. So they found free ways to make this video. I just think it's so much fun to watch students, be challenged by that. Like, how can I do this, And I know they will use it again in their practices because they enjoyed making the movie. And then I had them teach the other students how to use the program, which was fun too.
Yeah, and one thing that I've been really impressed by in the student response to this incident in particular and other opportunities that have arisen is that everybody seems to want to help, and everybody really both appreciates and I think understands after a little bit of time on reflection the difference between a hypothetical and an actual problem. In our research and writing classes, a lot of what we do is focus on writing predictive memos or having sort of fun or interesting paradigms or hypos. But if you present this to somebody who actually says, this is a problem for somebody that might live next door or down the street, or 30 people who have experienced a thing that's in the headlines today, there's a lot more, I think, appreciation to kind of what that means, which I've always been impressed by. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll give Tara, you and Julie a chance to have the final word. The other thing that I've recognized is that not every student can take a clinic. A clinic is a big commitment in terms of a number of hours, and you get really, really deep experiences there. But that doesn't mean that not every student can have some kind of an experience connecting with this. And such the kinds of things that Tara often does is mobilizes students who might be going into big law or intellectual property or other things, who say, I also want to make a difference, even if I know that's not the career for me. And opening it up to students to see that and finding these opportunities of collaboration and accomplishment, I think, is really something that consistently impresses me about the students I've experienced at Richmond, and I'm sure are out at a lot of other law schools.
And Roger, I would love just to also touch upon what you were saying in your first part too, is that what I see as being so beneficial from this experience, as well as other both clinical and pro bono experiences, is that it's taking what students are learning in classes and contextualizing it here in their backyard. So you can be reading about, you can be reading about these protests against systemic racism, and you can be reading about law enforcement interaction with communities. But here in Richmond, this is what was happening. This is, and for our students to see that what they're learning about maybe in the classroom or in textbooks, in real life and in real time, and their ability to engage with it is so important. So what they learned in crim law, what they learned in criminal procedure, what they learned in evidence, they're being able to put into practice here in the community in which they live. And I find that that is such an almost, maybe it's the because tomorrow is the Feast of the Epiphany, I don't know, but it's like it's epiphanical, like students get this epiphany from the experience of connecting the classroom, the text to the actual practice, and not just the actual practice, but the actual practice in their hometown.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I mentioned it earlier, there's just a huge disconnect between the perspective of the police and other law enforcement and the protesters. And that was something that gave us an opportunity to have some really powerful conversations in the classroom about why did that officer so quickly size my client up and assume he was nothing but bad? Where did that come from? And, that officer's not a bad person, but clearly he has his bias and he could not get past it. If you had heard the way he talked to the parents, you would have been horrified. Even after the things that I showed you, which I think had their own element of horror. But for the students to, I had students in the class who were interning with the state police or had planned to go into the FBI or, spent the summer in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office prosecuting cases. And to enable us to have conversations about how you can go into the law enforcement side of the criminal justice system or the criminal legal system and bring about positive change, was really powerful. And how we have a duty as attorneys to always try to, make things better than how we found them. And I think that the students got really excited about that. And even if they really came from a more law enforcement or prosecution perspective, they could see the flaws in the way officers were approaching the situations. They were concerned about tear gassing people who were doing nothing wrong and hadn't even gotten to the point of, it was half an hour before the curfew went into place. And they were saying, why is this happening in my community? And this is not okay. And to have people stand up and say, you can both hold people accountable and keep the community safe and enforce the laws of the Commonwealth and treat people decently and respect their First Amendment rights, was what this was all about. So it just gave us so many wonderful opportunities to engage the students and to hear their perspective and to hear their stories about times when they had been approached by officers and when they were doing nothing wrong and had been assumed to be in the wrong from the very beginning, and how to respond to that and how to have those conversations with their peers about, look, this is what happens to me in my community when an officer approaches me. And, students would ask me things like, how do I tell my, 5-year-old African-American son how to interact with the police safely? And it just gave us the opportunity, that opening, to have some beautiful conversations. And I'm just excited to have been a small part of this project. And I'm so grateful to both Roger and Tara for allowing me to play a role. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
I think
both.
I think it was a leading role, Julie. But if I could add just one more piece, Roger, before we go, because to the point of how what we did here could actually translate to other law schools, I think that what was critical for us was also the moment in time we occupied, and iConnect's interest in also advancing issues of racial equity and racial justice. And again, the mastery of Josh and Roger in forging that relationship, the two help us. But my engagement in other areas and other platforms, there is on the corporate side this profound interest in racial equity and advancing racial justice, going beyond just changing your Insta profile pic, and I think that this is a moment in time for law schools who have relationships with many of these companies to begin with, to be having more conversations with them about what their tools can be used in the pro bono context, in the clinical context, to help support these issues. And I was just so heartened. The iConnect people were so gracious and generous with their time and their expertise, especially since I am such a noob when it comes to so much technology, really being so helpful every step of the way. We cannot be, unicorns in this. There must be other corporate law school partnerships that are just waiting to be sown in this time of need.
Yeah, and I want to just follow up by saying that iConnect has been so generous that they're letting me continue to use the platform in my clinic, which I didn't even expect to happen. And they're excited to continue the collaboration. And we get body-worn camera footage regularly in our cases, and now I get to teach the students how to use this incredible platform in all of my work. So it's been a wonderful partnership.
Perfect. Well, it's a pleasure working with you both. Look forward to seeing you again soon. And thanks to everybody who's showed up for our section award here. Thanks especially to Pauline for years and years and years of contributions. And thanks to everybody on the membership here. I think this is a really inspiring conversation and a really good way to kick off 2021. Let's start things out thinking about new ways that we can make change, make good, and put our theory and hypotheticals into practice, and put the tools of change both in the hands of our students and in the toolbox of us and all of our colleagues. So thank you, everybody. This is a great way for me to kick off AALS, and my first thing where I actually put on a suit coat for 2021. So excited about that. Wonderful experience. I'll connect with everybody on Zoom, on email, and in any other way, and look forward to times to being together in person as well. So thank you so much. Take care now.